What's up, nerds? Harbinger here, another flip video. Here's your meme for the day. I'm continuing with that theme of dead memes until Halloween. The Borrowmere meme definitely played out. One does not simply do computer science. Very, very true. I was going to go Harambe for today's dead meme, but I guess the Harambe meme is dead. Ouch. Anyway, brief note before we start on the actual conditional notes. We are at like 69 or 70 subscribers for the YouTube channel. If I can get a 100th subscriber, that person or the person that referred them wins a special prize. So definitely a fire achievement in your life. It can even go in your college letter of recommendation or like your list of accomplishments when you're applying for a job. You know, hey, I was the 100th subscriber on Harbinger's YouTube channel and I won a cool thing for it. So let's get rolling. Today's notes are on conditionals. So conditionals are like a way for the program to make a decision, right? It's not always do line 1, then line 2, then line 3, then line 4. Sometimes the path of the program flow kind of depends on certain circumstances. So that's what this one does. Maybe we could have something like, you know, initialize it to something like, I don't know, 16. And you want to know if they can drive or not, right? So maybe it wasn't 16, maybe it was 14, maybe it was 100, whatever. So you need a conditional, like if age is at least 16, then we can do something about it. So for now, let's take the value out, right? So some value, that because I don't want people to think that like, well, of course it's going to do whatever, right? It's 16. So I want to do if it's at least. So at least is greater than or equal to. And in Java, we don't have a single character that says greater than equal to. So use a greater than followed by an equal sign. That's legal. And I want to say, hey, if age is at least 16, you can drive. So you'll note that I don't put a semicolon there, right? There is no this. Semicolons end thoughts in Java. And no one really ends a thought after saying if. You kind of have to give the result, you know, in order for the thought to be complete. The only people, I always say, the only people who always end a statement with an if are parents. If you don't clean your room, and they don't say anything after that. You know, if you don't get your homework done, and it's just kind of implied. Java doesn't do implied very well. So, let's say like, you can drive, maybe. You know, but what if they're not at least 16? What if they're 12? What if they're 2 or something like that? So there's this. Else, SOP, wait to drive. Something like that. So I don't want people to think that I indented and you have to indent every single time. Right? Yes in Python, no in Java. So Python cares about indenting. Java doesn't care about white space. The other thing that I'm not doing that a good programmer does is put squiggle brackets in. So typically, when you have results from conditionals, you put squiggle brackets in because that kind of cordons off the consequences. Hey, if you release 16, do all the stuff inside these brackets. And there might be 10 lines of code in there. There might be 100 lines of code in there. There might be 2. But it's good practice to have brackets around the results. And so if age is at least 16, do this. And else means otherwise. So if all else failed above, do this. And I don't need an else in order for my code to work. I could just have a regular old if, that's cool. And I could do other things too. So I could have something like else if age is at least, I don't know, like 14. You're probably in high school, though. I mean, there's that, right? Which means, hey, if you're not at least 16, maybe you're at least 14. So maybe you're 14 or 15. And then I could have, like, else SOP, you know, keep playing Mario Kart or something like that. Keep practicing. So anyway, it's this, otherwise check this, otherwise this. And I could have 1,000 else ifs. It's not necessarily if, then else, if, then else. I could have a whole lot of else ifs. I could have even made them all separate ifs. Hey, if this, do whatever. If this, do whatever. If this, do what. I could have all these different ifs. The problem is, though, that if you have an if, and then an if, then an if, then an if, all of them could be true, and so all those consequences might happen, and that's okay. But also the compiler evaluates every single if statement, which is fine, except for it might take a little bit more time, unlike this guy, where if this is true, it skips all the stuff below it. And if this is false, well, then it looks at the next thing. And if this is true, it skips the else. If it's false, it comes down here. So the other thing people are probably thinking, like, well, age is an integer. So really, the only way this is going to happen is if you're 14 or 15. Right? Like, hey, if you are at least 16, do this. So if you're 15 or 14, you're probably still in high school, though. Like, that's cool. This means if you're exactly 14. You can't do a single equal sign in Java in a conditional because a single equal sign, it's called an assignment operator. You are assigning a value to something. Hey, age, you are 14. I don't want to set it, I want to check it. So you better check yourself, age. Two equal signs means, hey, if this is equal to this, do something. Oh, wait, what if they're 15? So it's kind of like saying if they're 14 or 15, do something. So I'm going to do this symbol. And that's the symbol that's above the enter key and underneath backspace. I don't even know what it is. It's like a vertical bar. So shift that button. It's next to the closing squiggle bracket. Like I said, it's right underneath backspace. It looks kind of funky. It means or. So if you're wondering, or is the same thing as this. And I'm going to space it out here. And is the same thing as a double ampersand. It's not a single ampersand. That does something really weird. But double ampersand checks like a logical and. You know the difference, of course? And both sides of the condition have to be true in order for it to work. And or one of them has to be true in order to enter. So like age is 14 or it's 15. If you're one of the two, it's going to do this. You know, what you don't want to do, and this is called a logic error if you remember the other video. If you're 14 and at the same time you're also 15, do this, that's not going to happen. So, or makes sense there. So far so good. And I'm doing this kind of procedurally, right? Like I would have like a public static void main string args here, and I would do all this stuff. That works, and if you saw your lab, some of that, or you're going to see your lab, some of it looks a lot like this. You know, hey, can you check to see if one number is a multiple of another? You know, can you check to see some quality in math? You know, hey, does this thing form a triangle? Something like that. So, for instance, let's check like a Pythagorean theorem thing, right? This is not on the lab, but I could have, in theory, something like int a, comma, let's say like equal to some value, and int b, same thing. Well, not the same thing, like some value. I don't want people to think that they're all the same number. Some value, and int c equals some value. And what you couldn't do on a quiz is say, well, it wouldn't compile because there's some comments there. Assume that I gave them some values, right? Like assume I initialized the variables. So I want to know if it forms a right triangle. So I'm going to say something like if a times a plus b times b, almost, equals c times c. Hey, it's a right triangle. So SOP, right. That's cool. And I think the problem is, A, I don't have squiggle brackets. And this, almost, SOP, not right. So there's a couple issues here. First off, what if A is the hypotenuse? Or what if B is the hypotenuse? Right? I could do this. So I could say else if B times B plus C times C equals A times A. Right, I could do that. Hey, so that's checking to see if A is the hypotenuse. And I'm going to do the same thing all over again, but I'm going to check if... So I've got C, A, this has got to be B. which means this one has to be A. So, works like that. If C is the hypotenuse, it's right. Otherwise, if A is the hypotenuse, it's right. Otherwise, if B is the hypotenuse, it's right. Otherwise, it's not a right triangle. Right? That's okay to stack the ifs. I almost did it just separate ifs. But again, that takes more time. And the other way you could have done it is with the ors. Right? Like I could have grouped conditionals. Hey, if that works, or that works, or if this works, then I know it's right. Otherwise, it's not. So that's possible too. And the other thing I keep doing is I keep leaving off squiggle brackets. So again, indenting doesn't matter. Like I could literally do that and that's okay. Heck, I could do that and it's okay, right? Because Java doesn't care about white space. And often when I write an if statement with a single kind of condition and a single consequence, I write it like this because it seems reasonable and it seems pretty readable. But thanks, but no. What I do want to point out though is if you don't use squiggle brackets, and this is a danger, it's assumed that the very first line that follows the if statement is the one and only consequence. So SOP you are smart for checking all three possible hypotenuses. Hypotenusi? I don't know. There's a plural for hypotenuse somewhere, but this seems less than cool. So this looks fine, right? Like, hey, if whatever, tell them it's a right triangle, and then tell them they're smart for checking all three, right? Because, you know, the programmer should be congratulated for how smart they are, I guess. And then you're like, oh, look, there's an else there. It's not going to compile. It thinks this is the consequence for if, and then no matter what, it's going to put that in there. And then the else is like, wait, I'm not attached to an if, because this if, as far as it's concerned, it ends there. And then it's like, oh, we're back to normal code. So this is like this else kind of hanging off in space. It doesn't have anything it's attached to. And in order for it to be attached to the if, these two consequences have to be in squiggle brackets. So you group them together. So now the else is like, oh, right, here I am, and I'm with the previous unattached if, so it's right there. And that's cool because I know that all of these things are consequences of this. And again, I should be a good programmer, and I should do one of those. Other thing I want to point about ifs, when checking, like what if I want to see which thing is the biggest? So int A equals whatever, you know, whatever, and int B equals something, and I got int C equals like a value or something like that. So if I want to see which one's the biggest, I know that we would say in English, if A is bigger than B, sorry, if A is less than B, which is less than C, clearly, you know, it's got to be something like C is the biggest, which is funny because I don't actually want it to say C. I want it to say like this, right? I mean, that's cool, but Java doesn't like this. Java doesn't read it like English does. In English, we would say, oh, if A is less than B, which is less than C, but Java likes to compare two things at a time and only two things at a time. So really what it wants to do is it wants you to say, use an and a B there. So if A is less than B and B is less than C, do this. So that works. So a couple other brief little pieces we're going to pick up here. It's okay to use ifs inside classes. So I could have something like inside the ice cream cone class. And if you remember all the variables, you know, we had scoops and sprinkles, and whether it was like a sugar cone or not, I don't remember, but I do remember we had a price. And what if I'm running an ice cream stand and I want to make my customers a promise that they're never going to spend more than $5 on an ice cream cone? You know, so what if you got 15 scoops and it was stacked really high, and you got sprinkles, you were sadistic enough to ask some poor ice cream worker with 15 scoops of ice cream stacked up, hey, can I have sprinkles on that? Please. But anyway, what if I want to make my customers a promise, no matter what you ask for, I'm going to cap it at $5. So we had this constructor, public, ICC, and whatever. It took some information in, info coming in. So maybe it's the parameterized constructor, maybe it's the default constructor, whatever. And let's say we had something like scoops equals like SC or whatever was coming in here. You know, whatever. There's some parameters and we could set it equal. And sprinkles equals whatever. I don't remember what they were, but other variables initialized here. Right? And then at the very bottom, we've got like this formula for price. So I guess we'll call it price. I don't remember if it's price or cost, but I really don't care. Let's call it like $1.75 plus, I don't even know, like 75 cents per scoop or something like that. 75 times scoops plus, I don't even know. You know what, let's just end it there. That seems cool. So I'm going to do a couple things. I'm going to make a condition. Hey, if they have sprinkles, I'm going to charge them 50 cents. My name's Krabs. I like money. If sprinkles equals true, that's legal to do. Hey, if they chose sprinkles, I'm going to hit them up. So I want price plus equals 0.5. I can do that, and I don't need it else. You know, hey, if sprinkles is false, what? They just don't get added any extra money. The other thing I want to do is if price exceeds $5, I'm going to set price down to $5. Why would I check if it's equal to? So if price is more than $5, you are now $5. So this caps it, and this checks to see if they want sprinkles. So I'm going to leave myself a comment just in case. If they wanted sprinkles, upcharge, upcharge. So something like that. And the other one is I want to check, you know, cap the price at $5. So apparently I like money, but not that much. You know, Mr. Krabs would never cap the price at something, right? So that's working right now. The other version of this is if too much coffee, guys. Sorry. If sprinkles. Because really what's happening in a conditional is if anything inside those parentheses is true, do this. And this means, you know, sprinkles is true. Hey, if sprinkles, blah. So if this is true, do whatever. Beginning programmers usually like this a lot because it makes sense. Hey, if sprinkles is true, whatever. Veteran programmers tend to do this because it's a little more concise and readable. Sprinkles is a Boolean, and if the Boolean value inside the parentheses is true, do this. So I tend to do this when I write code, but I perfectly understand why people do this. If I want to make it more readable, that's cool. Of course, there's another way to do it, and not to be a jerk, but one last way to show you. The word for not in Java, it's not like VB. So in VB, it's less than, greater than, and in other languages, it's literally the word not. In Java, not is exclamation point. So this little character right here, that's shift 1, means not. So if I really wanted to be funny, I could say like if sprinkles isn't equal to false. That's just terrible. So something like if sprinkles is not equal to false, then add 50 cents on the price. So this is not equal to, and I could have put the not out in front and then check to see if sprinkles is true, but there's like 15 ways to check something true in Java, which is kind of funky. So one last note on conditionals. Checking string equality. People are terrible at this all the time. So string user, sorry, let's call it like UN for username, and maybe it's something, I don't know. Nerd. And maybe they've got a password. So, of course, right? And I want to check if the username is nerd. So, what I can't do, goodness gracious me, if UN equals nerd, doesn't work. It doesn't. There are circumstances where this will work. We're not doing it today. So, does not work. Be careful. People will do this all the time in Java. I guarantee it's the kind of thing people do over and over and over, and they never learn that they should not do equals with strings, except for this very particular circumstance that I'm not going to go over now because I feel like we're just learning ifs and I don't want to wreck people just yet. So what you really want to do when checking strings is if un.equals dot equals, that works. Question mark, question mark? It works. That's because we talked before about there are primitive variables like doubles and ints and booleans and chars, and there are objects of classes like ice cream cones and cats and musicians and castles and all that good stuff. And strings kind of straddle between, both worlds. They're kind of primitives, but they're kind of classes. And we've seen an equals method before. If you've looked inside that source generate stuff in Eclipse, equals checks to see if two objects are equal. And that's kind of weird too. Like, how do you check to see if two ice cream cones are equal? That's possible, but a little bit weird. And so this is Java's way of checking equality between objects. And here strings are acting like objects of classes. Hey, I'm going to check if the string nerd equals this up here, like equals UN. So just be careful. That's a really tricky kind of concept for a lot of people, and I want to make sure that you're careful about string equality and integer equality. I want to make sure you know that classes can have if statements inside them, and you're going to see that in the lab. You have to know about and. You have to know about, there's a slight difference too, before I forget. This is called vocab-wise, as long as we're on the whole vocab thing. I've got like 2 minutes left in this video that I got to get rolling on. This is called a compound if. That's because compound means two things joined together. And so whenever you see like an and or an or, that's definitely a compound. We could have done what's called a nested if. And instead, that's like saying if A is less than B. And then inside of that, if B is less than C. Sorry, I'm trying to get better about the squiggles. SOP that. So these two are functionally equivalent. Hey, if A is less than B and B is less than C, blah. And the nested version is, one thing inside of another one, like Russian nesting dolls. One is inside another. This is an if statement inside an if statement. So if talking about dead memes, it's kind of like the yo dog dead meme. Yo dog, I heard you like if statements. So I put an if statement in your if statement. So you could check conditions while you're checking conditions. Man, I should have had that in the very beginning. Oh well, sometimes meme genius hits later on. That would have been much danker than the one with which I went. Yeah, I used the word danker in a sentence, and then I was grammatically correct about not ending a sentence in a preposition. So, what up? Be really careful about squiggle brackets and where things end. You have to know about or. You have to know about if, else if, else if, else if, else if, else if, else, versus if. Be careful about that one too. So, good luck with the lab. I'm not there on Wednesday, but it's all in this stuff. There's a worksheet too. We're going to be talking about it on Friday. And remember, we got to get those 100 subscribers. I hope you're thinking of t-shirt ideas, because if we don't get any more ideas in, I don't have any submitted yet. So if none come in, no shirts this year for the comp sci students. Hey, sorry, maybe next year. Sorry, seniors. Other than that, let's get it, baby. Harbinger out.